Okay, everybody, I think we're going to make a start to session 2. Apologies for the delayed start, but I hope you had enjoyed the opportunity to look around the Rebellion costume department. My name's Ruth Moore. I'm the Theatre and Performance Officer for Torch. But those of you who've got an interest in theatre, and I know there's a few here, won't be awfully surprised to hear that I quite often find myself working on projects with Tasha, our Creative Industries Officer, because the space in between live performance and immersive technologies is very fertile. There's so many interesting things already happening in it, and there's lots more to come. So just to kind of switch you on to what we want to do in this session, the second of our sessions this afternoon, after having had the landscape set so beautifully by our 2 speakers at the beginning, and thank you again for that. I hope you'll find ways that you'll be bringing your expertise into this part as well. We're now going to hone right in on 2 projects which are at the intersection of research and immersive technologies. So these are 2 projects that are currently funded by the Torch Knowledge Exchange Innovation Fund. The way we're going to run this part of the session, which will take us up till about 3 o'clock, is that we're going to give both of the projects a chance to introduce themselves, and then I'll ask some general questions to try and open up that landscape and then turn it over to you. So what would be really helpful to us as you're listening to the presentations is to be thinking along the lines of, well, if I'm here as a researcher, how might my particular area of research have applicability in these kinds of things, and what might I want to ask these people who are right in the midst of a collaboration? Or you might, as a consumer of all the beautiful things that are happening in these spaces at the moment, want to call our attention to things that are happening that you've been to visit or you've tried, and ask, have you thought about something along those lines? What are the limitations of that technology? There's lots of ways in which we want to bring you into this conversation. You're not just an audience, you're here to share your knowledge as well. So we'll just very briefly hear who each person on our panel is and what area of research or what organisation they represent, and then we'll delve into the 2 presentations. So perhaps we can start at this end.
Hi, I'm David Taylor. I am an associate professor in the English department at Oxford, as well as a fellow at St Hugh's College at Oxford. And my area of expertise is restoration and 18th century theatre in Britain. So theatre from about 1660 through to the mid-19th century.
Hello everyone, my name is Simon Hobbs. I am a co-founder of a small team called Arcade, small business called Arcade. We are a team of ex-architects, digital entrepreneurs, front-end developers, back-end developers, Unity developers, game artists, 3D animators, lots of different kind of disciplines, all molded into one team. And our company manifesto, if you like, is to use immersive technologies to connect people to place through play. And thanks again, Lee and Chris, for your chat earlier. We've already worked, I think we've probably come across you at some point. We've worked with Digital Catapult and Story Futures on 2 of our largest projects to date.
Hello, I'm Wes Williams. I'm usually live in the 16th century in France, but more recently I've become the Torch director, and I just want to add my words to those of Tasha and Ruth to thank everybody for coming and to thank Rebellion for making this day possible. I'm here partly because, as well as being a researcher who looks at 16th century French literature and culture, and 17th as well, I also make theatre. And this project that I'm involved with Costas is sort of at the intersection of old stuff or early modern stuff and very modern stuff. Over to Costas.
Hi, I'm Kostas Pataridis. I am an algorithmic software development. I do graphics, real-time graphics and image processing. And I work a lot with medical imaging, VR, scanning, 3D scanning, projection mapping. I'm happy to collaborate with Wes.
Thank you, all of you. Something I should have said at the beginning is that we have an array of mics in front of us, but they are not amplifying us. They're here so that we're picked up on the video. So if you have any difficulty hearing us at any point, just wave at me and I'll try and prompt us to increase our volume. So we're going to hear first from David and Sai's project, which is Recovering Spectacular Theatre of the 18th Century. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to the two of you to tell us a bit more about what you're doing.
Thanks very much. It's really exciting to be here. And again, thanks to Tasha and Rebellion Studios for making this happen. So perhaps to start by saying that the period of theatre that I research and teach is really the period of theatre that that gives us a sense of spectacle, at least public theatre, from the 1660s onwards. So the second half of the 17th century, the public theatres in London start to have movable, elaborate scenery, trapdoors, special effects, flying machines, pyrotechnics of all kinds, and my current research project is specifically interested in spectacle, in the history of spectacle, in the practices of spectacle, and how people think about spectacle in the 17th and 18th centuries. The difficulty with that, as a researcher and as a teacher, is that there aren't many visual sources. Okay, that the visual archive is limited, exceptionally limited. What we have surviving are texts, but don't necessarily that tell us what was said on stage, but certainly don't tell us or don't show us very well what was actually what people would have seen. And a different way of putting it is that that word immersive has come up a lot already today, and the Restoration stage, the 18th century stage, really began to give people immersive experiences. But those experiences are essentially lost to us largely in the archive that has come down to us. So what I wanted to try and do was to find a way to kind of recuperate the kind of wow factor of spectacular theatre of the 18th century. In the V&A, in the Victorian Albert Museum, there are 3 incredibly rare surviving set models from a pantomime performed in London at Covent Garden Theatre in 1785, a pantomime called Oh My, or A Trip Around the World. And as with all the pantomimes of the 18th century, which were popular then as now, at Christmas especially, it was about extravagant scenery and costumes and impressive visual effects, rapid fire scene changes especially. So, but of course, these little set models only give the slightest sense, I mean, better than nothing, of course, but only give the slightest sense of just how impressive these scenes must have looked on stage. And that's where Sai comes in and Arcade comes in. So I think at some point I was having lunch with Abby Williams and was talking about this and the difficulty I was having. You know, how do I get students engaged with the idea of spectacle? How do I think about spectacle and kind of recuperate spectacle in some sense in my own research? And Abby said, talk to torch people, and then I got in touch with Sai at Arcade. And the idea behind the project really is to take those 3 set models in the V&A that are tiny, kind of that size, and make them, scale them up to actual size as they were in the 18th century, and to allow someone to not just see that, but actually to inhabit that, to immerse themselves once more in that environment. And Arcade, with their expertise in augmented reality and place and narrative, were perfect partners for that. Shall we?
Thank you.
Should we show that?
Yeah, it's probably worth caveating at the moment that this project is still very prototypical. It's a very early stage project. But what we did have, thanks to David, was this incredible access to these wonderful models. So the V&A have digitized these. So we have some amazing 2-dimensional photographs of each of the parts of these models. So in an early conversation, we said to David, well, look, within the budget and the realms of what we can achieve here, we could probably take those photographs and model them up. So if you pop to the next slide. So here are just a couple of renders of these three-dimensional assets that we created from these photographs. And we're using a lot of other bits and pieces of research that David had found. We went through a few iterations to work out the scale and the size of these things. And then at that point, once we'd worked that out, we then started to play around with how does this look like when you place it into augmented reality using your mobile device in a relatively large space in front of you, and then how does it feel when you walk through it? And I think, David, you said the first time you tried it, it was quite emotional because it's something that hasn't been experienced before, right? You can't walk around these sets, but whereas using immersive technology, we now can get to an approximation of what it felt like to be inhabiting this theatre set. If you want to chat, I will try and... So I've got the app as a demo, and it, again, caveating, is very rough. But I'll see if we can get it to work in the space here.
Yeah, so a couple of things to add. One is that this was funded through a Torch Knowledge Exchange Innovation Fund, so incredibly lucky and grateful to Torch for providing the funding to make this possible. And the aim was, in this initial phase, to build a kind of prototype app. It's not ready yet for release on the kind of app stores, Android or Apple, but it gives a real sense of where this technology might help us in teaching and research for this topic specifically. But also, I think what's excited both of us is the way that this could be applied to almost any heritage context in which we have spaces that are lost. That in almost any heritage context, someone could, at the click of a button on their smartphone, suddenly inhabit a space which has either changed radically or which has been lost entirely. So that's one area that we'd love to push this into. Another area is finding ways to work with theatres, the possibility of actually performing in these kind of virtual spaces, of actually doing new creative work or new performance work in these spaces. So that's the idea. We had a really exciting meeting a couple of weeks ago with Bristol Old Vic Theatre, their heritage team. Bristol Old Vic is the oldest theatre in the country that's been continuously working. It opened in 1766, so it's of the time.
I might just jump
Sure.
in with one question that
Yeah.
I was going to ask later, but just for you, David, had you dabbled in anything like this before? Is this...
No, what I'd done before was work with theatre companies to put plays that hadn't been performed in centuries back on their feet. So I was that kind of recovery work was something quite familiar to me. This kind of recovery work completely unfamiliar to me. And one of the things that was really exciting was that for me there's a direct connection between the period I'm researching and the practices I'm researching and what Arcade are doing now, and indeed what Rebellion's doing now. I mean, it's all that the spectacular pantomimes of the 18th century are the kind of prehistory of not just modern West End spectacle, but also of CGI superhero movies, of current video games. All of that is kind of we traced back in one form or another to what was going on in the theatres in this period. So I like the idea of kind of cutting edge spectacular technologies of the 18th century meeting and being kind of restored by cutting edge spectacular technologies of the 21st century.
It would be good to hear from Wes and Kostas, whose project is called Shaping Destiny: Experiments in Embodiment. So I'll hand over to the two of you to tell us more about what you've been doing.
Okay, so I'm going to kick off, and then our project is part of, or the Torch-funded bit of this project is part of a larger Wellcome-funded public engagement with research project. And it's an experiment that we're putting together, people from the Department of Anatomy and Genetics, with myself and others in the humanities, to explore, shaping destiny. In other words, on the one hand, there's people whose primary interests is in cell formation and organ formation, and then as an extension of that, body formation, body shapes. And then there's me, whose primary interest in this case is on the back of a book I wrote about monsters in the 16th and 17th century, including a lot of work on what we wouldn't call monsters today. In other words, variously deformed, disabled, there's lots of words for it, people who come out born with a different shape to the one that one casts as the norm. So what we're asking is, in some sense, the very old nature-nurture question about how do we think of bodies as in relation to certain kinds of norm. Next one, please. But we're also looking at very specific examples. This is a very famous monstrous birth from the 16th century, the monster of Ravenna, that was said to have been born to a woman in Ravenna in 1513 and then went all over Europe. It's one of the technological hits of early print, pamphlets like this of kind of strange hybrid creatures who are part animal, part cipher, part sign, and monster comes partly from the Latin monstrare, to show, and so they reveal something. And at the heart of our project is a question whereby you look at a sort of genetic understanding of body formation, and in particular, as it's emerged, the head-tail axis, the degree to which most mammalian bodies, and indeed beyond mammals, have a head-tail axis, and the degree to which that can shift. So we're interested in hybrids. We're also interested in the force of the imagination. These two images on the left are from a medical book of the 16th century that explains how these two children ended up the shape and the way and the colour in which they are, and it's because of the power of the woman's imagination. She thought about John the Baptist on the left and therefore produced a very hairy child, and the white mother in a white couple was thinking about a painting of a black servant and therefore produced a small black child. In other words, the women's imagination has an effect on the child that's born. That's all 16th century theory. We're trying to think about this in relation to contemporary reproductive theory and also modern reproductive, just developmental science. The way we're doing this is to get to sort of conjoin all of this with dance and theatre, and with VR. So we're also connecting up with two dance companies in Oxford, Parasol, who are a group of largely disabled young dancers who are very interested in the project and who are giving us lots of feedback about the whole sort of history side of things. And then another group of hip-hop dancers who are very interested in the body-tail axis. If you know hip-hop, you'll know why, because it's all about, where do you move your body-tail axis when you're dancing. Last picture, please, of mine, I think. Yeah. And to go back to the superhero thing, it's also become really clear in the process of working with those two dance companies, dance groups, that the monster and the whole figure of the monster as a kind of historical entity relates very strongly to Marvel Comics, and the whole notion of a kind of hybrid creature, whether it's Spider-Man or Iron Man or whoever else turns up. And they are really teaching me a lot, actually, about the kind of prehistory of all that world. One story that I've been obsessed with for a long time, and that's a kind of red thread through my book on monsters, is the story of Andromeda. I won't tell the whole story now, but it's my cue to then pass over to Kostas, whose company is called Andromeda.
Yes. Okay, so when these guys came to me and they said, okay, we have this project and it involves the human form moving, and I'm really interested in the human form as a source of data because it's very organic, it's very interesting, exciting to visualize, and it just happened that in my normal work, I work with an Israeli company doing volumetric scanning, 4-dimensional. So very similar to this thing over there, but in a much smaller form factor and real time. And a very, very high quality as well. And I may have been one of the few people in early days that I've seen in VR, in an empty space, the human form animating with 8K textures and all the bells and whistles, and it looked as if I was in a dream. It looked so, and it still does, so realistic. But imagine if you've never experienced it before at this the correct size. Now, the problem with this is, of course, is that these devices cost a lot of money and need people to work on. So we thought, okay, let's try to do something where we scan the dancers, and we'll split the problem into two sections. How do we scan them so that it's something interesting? And how do we visualize? Like, what sort of hardware and software we're going to use? For the scanning, you can say the easiest ways to film somebody, let's say, just whatever you would you could film on a normal phone or a camera, but that's not very exciting at all. So the next step up is to have a depth scanner. So a scanner that I could scan you, the image of you plus information about the depth. And if you combine a few of them, then you may be able to approach something that looks more volumetric, so that I can go behind you and I can still see your backs, let's say. And then how do we visualize this? So with visualizing, you can put it on a big screen and say, okay, this is it, and enjoy it, let's say. Or you can put it in AR, where I'm not a very big fan myself, or VR, which can be really spectacular, but there are pros and cons, because it's you're on your own when you do it. And since we said that we are going to make this as an installation, so it's our control environment, it's not a mobile phone, or it's not for the many people, it's just for a few that will be there on the day. So I said, let's go for VR. And since we don't have the budget to do proper full 360 volumetric, let's try to do something with 1 or 2 depth cameras and somehow make it very abstract. In reality, we are hiding the fact that we cannot scan people with full realism. But then again, we don't want the full realism because we are artists, We want to do things so that you imagine what they would look like. We want to show less, but to mean more. So so this is a kind of a mock-up that I made. So the project is still in progress. We're gonna do the scans in a month, and I did a mock-up with scans that I did in my professional scanner. This is the view that you see in VR. It's very abstract. I mean, we haven't decided that these are going to be the final visuals, of course, but it's people, the dancers, the experience, they really liked it, and we want to make let's say 5 vignettes of the dancers to tell a story from, let's say, nothing. So you put your headset, you see nothing, and then it evolves just like. Biology evolves with the cells, and then it will work out how it will end.
Another key partner in this project is the dance company, Alexander Whitley Dance Company, who themselves have a project called The Digital Body, where they're interested in. So they are professional dancers, as opposed to Parasol and Body Politic, the hip hop group, who are young folk, aged between about. Well, the youngest is 7, the oldest is around 17, 18. Alex's crew have, for some time, been working on, if you like that, again, spectacle, the combination between, if you've got digital projections or digital dancers on stage and live bodies on stage, which is more compelling? What's the real... what's the beef, if you like, when you have those two bodies in competition with each other? And that's one of the things we're exploring in this project as well, is can one get into the space of another, a differently configured body through VR, so that you yourself have a very strong sense of what it is to have a body different to the one that you happen to have?
One last thing about our scanning, because I'm also interested in developing this hardware. In that, with Alexander, I should have mentioned that we do this work with this company. We briefly consider the possibility of doing it as a mock-up, but I really think it would be a really bad idea. Seeing something scanned from sources and displaying that from sources, and seeing something that is recreated through skeleton animation. There is this uncanny valley for the second one that I really, really don't like. I like to see the moving images as they were scanned, even if it's so abstract as this one, than to see an animation of joints that then is dressed with something on top. Maybe at this level it doesn't make all that difference, but when you see textures and faces, and then it's the effect is stronger. And what we want to do with this is that, well, if it is successful and people enjoy it, and I think they will, judging from what we've seen so far, we would like to be able to do some touring, maybe show it to other people outside Britain, or get some. Okay, this is real time scanning. It's rather inappropriate, so it's the only video that I had. I'm really sorry, but and it shouldn't crash. But yeah, so this is real time, and so imagining it being like standing in 180 in front of you in VR, but that's not. This is our professional scanner. This is not the scanner that I kind of made up with Kinects and Vive controllers. Which is another interesting story. If somebody is technical here and wants to ask how we are actually combining multiple Kinects on a budget of under £1,000, they can ask me. I'll be glad to reveal all the secrets.
Okay, as opposed to revealing these secrets here. But okay.
Well, this is not £1,000. This is more closer to 100,000. But you know.
Would you join me in thanking our panellists for this session?